into this time. And so I'm going to ask Lee Roll, who is the chair of our Congregation Care Committee, to please start us off.
Good morning. And is William Tweedley with us? Good. I'm trying to find William. There he is.
I'm over here.
Hi. Hello there. Good. Welcome. And thank you so much for sharing your time and your talent and your caring with us. And I am just going to let you take over and talk about healthy caring, helpful and sustainable support.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Lee. I really appreciate the invitation to do this. Just a little background for those who don't know me. I've been in hospital chaplaincy for about the last 25 years. So that's the context in which I'm bringing some of this stuff. So I know, along with the invitation of the Zoom link to this service this morning, there was a link that to an article actually Lee found recently, and it's a wonderful article. So I asked her if she would have that posted as well. If you have not looked at it, if you've not read it, don't worry. But I would encourage you to go back and take a look at it. I'm only going to look a little bit at the very beginning, and then transition into two areas I want to focus in for this next little while. So in the article, one of the things that it does at the very beginning is you just can't imagine what someone else is going through. And you don't know what you could possibly do to help. You don't know, particularly, you don't know what to say. And most of us have been there at some point. Okay, so we hear someone's had some bad news. They're really dealing with a difficult situation and we don't know what to say. So sometimes we end up not saying anything. And if you read any of the advice columns in the paper, what you know is people also interpret the not knowing what to say and the silence as we don't care. So it's very easy when we're going through a difficult time to misinterpret someone else's discomfort as not caring. So we're going to talk a little bit about that piece. But none of us know what the right thing to say is all the time. None of us. So this is just really what I'm going to focus on today, really is to focus on listening skills of how we actually be with someone, how we hear them out. And then the second part, I really want to focus on some boundaries. So if you're a caregiver, focusing on the boundaries of what the limit of that role is, but also how do we make this sustainable in setting boundaries that allow us to do this for a much longer time without being burned out. So that's what I'm going to focus on. So what I'd like to do at the beginning here is I'm just going to talk a little bit, and then I would love to open up to some questions around the listening skill piece that I'm going to share with you. So you can either put, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, although I'd much rather hear your voice. That would be wonderful. So the only piece I'm going to say up front is this applies to kind of longer term situations. So I'm not talking about situations that are critical, that are traumatic. That's a whole other ballgame. But I'm talking about working with people who are grieving, who have chronic health issues that are going to be more than a few days. So that's really what I'm looking at. So I want to start with listening skills, because one of the things that people really always say they need when they're going through a difficult time is they just want someone to listen to them. And that's hard to find sometimes, because if we're going through difficult times and we're talking about it, there's so many people out there who want to give us their opinion. whether it be family, friends, even medical professionals. And sometimes you just need someone who's going to listen to you. So the first step in terms of actually being present to someone and being a good listener has got nothing to do with the other person. It's all to do with us. And the first step is, how do we prepare ourselves if we know we're coming into a situation that we're going to be offering support to someone? The first part really is we need to get ourselves focused. We need to be in a good place and we need to feel grounded before we can be helpful to someone else. Okay, it's the whole, put your own mask on before you help someone else in the aircraft piece. Because if we're distracted, if we have things that really are occupying our mind, if we are exhausted, we're going to be of limited help to someone else, because they may be sharing something very important to them, and we're thinking about the grocery stuff we have to get on the way home or that next appointment we have to get to. So it really is, how do you get yourself grounded and focused? And that's really up to you. For some people, it is prayer. For some people, it's exercise. For some people, it's deep breathing, music, whatever it is. I know Ellen talks often about Sabbath and how do you find that Sabbath space and how do you use it. So as you work on that, there will be things in there that you can use, even if it's just for a few minutes before you actually engage someone. So again, if we're not grounded ourselves and we're not in a good space, we're not going to be able to help someone else as well as we could. The other piece is people want you to be able to hear them out. And sometimes that's difficult because they may be saying things or sharing things that don't always feel comfortable, or you don't know how you're going to respond to it. So, but it's really important. And actually, people, what they don't necessarily want is they don't need someone to cheer them up. They don't need someone to make them feel good. They want someone who can hear them and who really can listen to them. So that actually was, I'm going to skip over to, I'm a big fan of the advice columns. There's perfect timing. There's one in Ask Amy this morning. So I'm just going to read it. Many people, myself included, this is the writer Ian, have anguish over how to respond to those facing cancer. And it could be any chronic condition. I'm now facing cancer myself. I understand and appreciate receiving positive vibes, prayers, you've got this, from friends, family, and medical professionals. Encouragement definitely has a place, but it would also help to let me be scared and be scared with me from time to time. Sometimes the positivity spin feels dismissive. To me, it can also feel like an overreaction to a situation that has many ups and downs. So there's more to it, but I think that captures it really nicely. People want a chance to be heard, and they want someone who's willing to be in that space with them. So I had a friend who trained chaplains a number of years ago, and her thing is, when someone's sitting in the muck of life, you can't really pull them out. What you can do is sit down in the muck with them and help them describe to you what it's like to sit in the muck for them. Once you do that, then they might be ready to work with you and to talk about some things that might be helpful for them. But you have to connect with them emotionally before you really can make much difference. So how do you meet them where they are? There's a couple of things. You've got to listen to them at a variety of levels, because you have to hear their words. You have to hear the tone, the energy, the pace. You also have to hear their body language. And that's a little bit harder if you're on the phone or if you're on a Zoom call and they don't have the camera on. But people can say the same words with a very different tone, and it means two entirely different things. So you really have to hear both examples. So people might say, oh, I'm fine, I'm really doing great today, and things are fine. Or they might say, yeah, I'm doing fine, everything's okay, it's all right. Very different tone, and how you interpret, how you respond might be different. It helps if you know the person a little bit as well, or if you've worked with them for a little while, because you're also listening for what's the change of the tone. Is this someone who's normally very upbeat and very positive, and today they just sound okay, which for most of us, okay might be okay, but for that person, okay is very different than how you would normally know them. I had tea with a friend, a former colleague, a couple of months ago, and she's one of the most, she's able to see the positive in almost any situation and any person. She's much better than me. And when I tea with her, she was okay, but she clearly was struggling with one aspect of her life and in-laws. And it almost was unnerving to see this woman kind of be almost in the space where many of us would normally be, because of that contrast with how I know her. So knowing and working with someone over time really also helps you read and listen to what they're saying, but also what's not being said or how it's being said differently. Okay. The other piece, when we're listening to people need encouragement. So it's helpful when someone's talking, if you're nodding, or if you're shaking your head, or if you trying to encourage them, say more like, oh, okay, yep, mm-hmm. So just the mm-hmm and the yes and the it's part of normal conversation. We do it with friends all the time. That's what we do. We're acknowledging that we're hearing it. And you know when someone's not listening. You can tell when someone's mind is kind of wandered off somewhere else, because you don't get the same response. Okay. Again, different when you're on the phone or on Zoom and you don't have a camera, but when you can see someone, you can pick up whether they're present or not. One of the things that we do a lot, and I notice this for myself, is someone's talking and they're sharing something, and I want to interject. I want to interject because I can relate to it, or I'm confused by it, or it made me think of something else and I want to share that, or they've said something that I want to respond to. But sometimes one of the hardest things about listening, sometimes we just have to reel that back in a little bit. We'll have a chance to respond to them. But sometimes if someone is sharing something that feels really important, sometimes we just need to give them a little space to finish their thoughts and to finish sharing what they want to share. And then it's less about what my thoughts and my ideas are. It's more about, what does this mean for the other person? So there's ways you can help connect to that person and show that you're listening. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to share a lot. There might be some questions. But there's ways you can acknowledge that you're hearing their feelings. I want to share a couple of things. You could say something like, that sounds scary, exciting, encouraging, sad, annoying. So you're naming a feeling that you're hearing that shows that you're listening to them. Or you could say, I'm imagining that I would be sad in that situation. How do you feel? So again, you're not making assumptions about how they feel, but you're asking them to expand a little bit on how they're feeling. Or it could even be, see, that makes you smile. Is that a memory that makes you happy? So there's an unspoken invitation for them to expand a little bit on that comment that they've made. If you connect to the feeling, it's encouragement for them just to continue to share some of what's going on. The other way you can show that you're also listening to people is you can reflect back what you're hearing. I'm hearing you say X. Is that right? And it's a chance for them to say, well, yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Or, well, not exactly. What I mean is they get to clarify and refine what they've shared. And if you're going to ask questions, always ask open-ended questions if you can. So if you ask them questions to which they can say yes or no, that kind of slows or stops the conversation sometimes. But if you ask them another question, they have to say a little bit more. So, you said that your doctor said X. What do you think of that? Or can you say a little bit more about what that means for you? What does it make you think? Or you can even ask them, so in the situation you just described, what do you think the pros and cons of that might be for you? So there's ways you've shown that you're listening and you're inviting them to take that next step forward in the conversation. The only thing I would say is if you ask a question, when you finish your question, stop and let them listen. I have the habit, I ask a question and then I'll just continue to talk and I don't give them space to answer a question. I try not to do that when I'm at work, but we're all human. So if you ask a question, when you put that question mark on the end of it, stop and give someone space. And some people, like myself, are people who need a little bit of time and space to think in our head before we want to speak. There's people who process out by talking about it. There's other people like me who process it in our head before we share a whole lot. The other piece in conversation, because again, the goal of your conversation with someone really is kind of conversation. It's like a conversation you would have with your friend. It just might be a little bit heavier than you might normally choose. But you're being available. You're being present. But there will be times when people that you're caring for and you know that they're going through a difficult time, there may be times when they just don't want to talk about whatever that thing is. There's times or days when they're just tired of talking about that. One of the things when I go visit patients, some of them will say, I just don't want to talk about why I'm in the hospital. They want to talk about other parts of their life because none of us are defined by our illness. None of us are defined by our losses or our grief or our abilities or anything else. We're defined as a whole person. And sometimes people just want to talk about part of their life that is working. There's again something in there, I think, Ask Amy about a month ago, where someone said, you know, my husband's dealing with cancer. So he has said he will only talk about his cancer on Mondays between these hours. The rest of the week, he doesn't want to talk about that. He wants to talk about the rest of his life, which gives a sense of, helps all of us remember that we are more than just one thing in our life. We are much bigger, much bigger. And last couple of things, and then I'm going to stop, have a little conversation, is when you're engaging people who are sharing things that are difficult or meaningful for them, don't dismiss their feelings or their experience. Don't say, oh, I'm sure it's going to be fine. Or, oh, I know someone who went through that, they're fine. You know, if you have two people who are going through exactly the same experience, exactly the same illness, how they experience it might be the same, but the impact on them could be entirely different. Just because of their perspective, their mindset, their upbringing, their family history, their relationships, all of it can be very different. So don't compare anyone's with anyone else's. It's, you know, what's this person's is that person's. And generally don't offer ideas or solutions unless they really invite you to do that. Occasionally, you might venture one idea, but there's a good chance if this is someone with other people in their lives, they probably have had 50 different suggestions that have already been made to them. And, you know, there's a good chance they've already thought of this. So if you do feel compelled to offer a thought or an idea, ask them first and just say, you know, I did have one thought. Would it be okay if I asked you? Or I know that you might already have heard this, or you might be tired of people giving you ideas. And they can say yes or no, but just ask permission. Right? You might have a grand idea they've never heard of, but just ask them first. I'm going to stop there. Questions, thoughts around listening skills, engaging difficult conversations, or reactions, disagreements to what I shared?
William, I'll put it on gallery so that you can see who might be. Looks
Right.
like Melissa, do you have our arm up? No, Nancy does. Okay.
Tell me if you think it's a bad idea to contact, if someone's having a serious problem that you know about, should you contact them only if you know them pretty well or really well? I mean, sometimes I've heard some really horrible things about someone, and, you know, I'll be honest, I don't necessarily know what's going on in their lives from day to day, and yet I don't want to ignore it. And is there a medium ground or a way to handle that?
That's a great question. I think, like many things, it depends.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you know them only tangentially,
Yeah,
then I would tend not to. I might see if there's someone that I know who's closer to that person. I may say, you know, do you think it would be helpful for me just to call? So you can check that out. And if it's in a church context, I mean, there's a good chance that Ellen might have some ideas or might be able to make connections as well. But if you do know them, there's different ways you can do it. Some people, if you don't know them really well, they might be surprised if they got a phone call from you.
Mm.
But
what about email?
But it might be an email. Just say, you know, I heard you're having a rough time, just thinking about you. Let me know how I can be helpful.
Okay.
So that could be, and that feels a little bit less intrusive. I think sometimes some folks, and again, it's generational. I think some people probably if you're younger, phone calls can feel a little intrusive sometimes because they don't really have the option but to talk to you. But in email, they have the option of whether they respond or not.
Okay.
Helen?
Well, I have a follow-up question to that because I've heard, that it's best not to leave the ball in their court, so that rather than saying, get in touch with me if there's anything I can do to be helpful, making saying something very specific, like, could I bring you dinner, or would it be helpful if I brought you dinner, or.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if you at some point look at the article that Lee got posted for this event, it's got some wonderful practical suggestions. So those are in there. Again, I think it depends. If someone called me up that I only tangentially knew, again, everyone's different. Someone might go, oh, they'd be wonderful. And other people might go, I think you can certainly offer something. It's a case, when people have gone through this before, or when I've gone through a difficult time before, I found it helpful for this. Would that be helpful to you? Or is there something else I could do instead? So yeah, absolutely. I think the more you know them, the more you have a sense of who they are, the more you know what might be helpful to them. So that way you can target that. If you know it's someone with a younger kid, you could say, would it be helpful if we did some childcare for you while you go to an appointment? Because that's what they need. Or if it's someone who's alone and can't get out, the food option is always a good one. And in the church context, it's hard to go wrong with food, right? What other thoughts or questions? Callie?
So thinking within the sort of longer term context of supporting someone through conversation and through listening, I think what you shared earlier of, the utmost sort of importance is just holding space for someone to be heard and actively listening and, affirming for that person that you're hearing them, reflecting that back, trying to kind of say, yeah, I'm hearing you feel this or that. If over a longer term, some things are repeating and you're like, God, I disagree with how you're interpreting this. And I can see this is causing you agita. And I think I could save you some angst if we talked about this. How do you go about figuring out nope, actually my role is really just to keep holding this space because I trust that you will get there on your own. That's how you'll know it, versus for God's sake, it's this simple, let me say this thing, So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Sure. I think there are times when we do have insights that someone else doesn't have. The challenge, I think that one of the pieces is it's always easier to sort someone else's issues out than is our own, right? I know how the world could be a whole lot better place than it is at the moment, but not too many people are asking me or getting my opinion. So it's one of these. I think when you're with someone for a while, I think there's a little bit more space because at that point you've established trust, you've established a relationship, and I think if you think of friendships, if you just met someone and you say, I think what would be really helpful is this thing, and that's very different than if you have known this person for 6 months or something like this, say 6 months. At that point, you've got some trust. They know that you care about them. They know that you're there for them. At that point, I think you have a little bit more flexibility to at least check it out and say, you shared this with me a couple of times. I wonder what it's like to be kind of coming back to that. If you feel a little stuck, and see if they want to, because they may not have noticed that pattern. But if you check it out and get their permission to say, I noticed something, can I share it with you? Even just that naming of it might help them think of, oh, yeah, okay, that might be helpful. Or they may, at that point, then you might say, I did have one thought. Again, it may or may not be helpful for you, but can I share it with you? And if you do that, if it goes somewhere, hey, wonderful. And if it doesn't, you just go, okay. Because it might be after that visit, or you've named something, they may go, no, 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 no. But once you leave, they may sit down and go, well, that's really interesting. Let me think about that. All right, because most of us, or many of us, our first reaction is no. And then we go, well, let me think about that. So does that help?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Jane?
Oh, you're on mute, Jane.
I'm also on my telephone because my laptop doesn't listen to me.
Okay.
No.
Well, we're listening to you.
Thank you. Do you have any advice? Occasionally, I have reached the point after many good conversations where I sense this person has issues that are important and they go beyond my ability to help. Suggestions on how to handle that? Not maybe you have to violate the person's confidentiality to talk to a soup. I don't know. When can you do that, and who would you seek out? Yeah.
All right, I'm going to come back to one of my default responses to any question is, well, it depends. It really depends. So if this is, if it's someone like within the church or within the congregation, then I would say, okay, if there's something here that's bigger than I can handle or can deal with, then I would point you back to Alan to look for some advice. Now, it might be that you don't necessarily breach that person's confidentiality, but you may share with Alan, okay, here's the situation. I want, you may not share specifics, but in the congregational setting, it might be perfectly fine. Again, Alan, I would look to you for guidance around how you work. But I often think it's really helpful if the person you're talking to, if you can get their permission, or if you give them a little feedback and say, this feels really, really important, and I'm happy to continue to support you. But I wonder if it would be helpful just to get another perspective or some other input, maybe a counselor or pastor, or just for that extra help that might get you past this little hurdle while I continue to also support you and visit with you.
Yeah, that is the statement I've learned to make. And I'm putting it on me. I'm saying, I don't think I'm able to help you on this. Can you think of someone else?
Perfect.
And then if it,
yeah,
and then if it were church, I'd go to Ellen.
Absolutely. So I think it's often good to point things back to the person and say, who do you think would be helpful to help, work on this with you as well? And some, most folks are going to come up with, someone else they know, or a counselor or a pastor. If they can't think of anyone, then you might say, would it be helpful if you found a counselor? Or would it be helpful if we talk to the pastor? or again, it depends if they have a connection to the church or not. But I think I love how you respond to it and just see what answers they have. Absolutely.
Well, and
Thank you.
connecting Jane's and Callie's questions and comments, you know, I would suggest that it's really important to find out what help the person actually wants. So, you know, sometimes we can jump in and assume that we know what help is actually needed. And so to directly ask that question, you know, what help do you need? And okay, once you hear that, all right, well, I have the capacity or the ability to help with this part of that. Can you think of other people in your life who could help with these other parts? Or going to Callie's query about, you know, making suggestions, you know, if they can't think of other people in their lives, you know, well, would you like some suggestions for other ways you might be able to get that help? You know, which in my case as pastor, you know, I mean, I obviously will, you know, provide pastoral counseling to anyone on any issue for a short period of time. I'm not a therapist. I mean, I have some of the skills of a therapist, but I'm not a therapist and I don't have a time capacity to see people for therapy. And so, you know, after a certain period, I will, if somebody clearly could benefit from further counseling, I will absolutely encourage them to do that. And I'm willing to help provide, you know, some resources and help with finding that.
Absolutely. So I think, Ellen, I think you're absolutely right. And it's very similar in a hospital setting. If someone says, oh, this has been really helpful, can I continue to work with you even once I go home? Then the answer really is no. I probably can talk to you once when you're home, but the goal of that is to transition you to someone in the community who is going to be a longer term support for you. Because again, you know, if we take time to support all of our former patients, we don't have the time to support those who are still coming into the system. And I think it's exactly the same in the congregational setting.
And I wonder if, you know, this is also a good time, because I think most of the people on the screen know what I'm about to ask Lee to share, but I think this is a really good time for Lee to just make sure that everybody on the screen knows what our congregation does have to offer in terms of congregation care.
I think that our congregation care committee and team are open to any requests, to any concerns that you have, and we hope that people will come and share with us.
Yeah, so we have a committee that's led by Lee that's, you know, 6-ish people, and that group kind of, you know, strategizes, if you will, and kind of sets up what is possible. And then we have a team that we created during COVID of a much larger group of people who stepped up and said that they were willing to reach out to, you know, 1 or 2 people-ish in the congregation on a semi-regular basis, just to keep those connections going, which was especially important during COVID. But I think that we came up with a model during that time that is really going to work well for us going forward. And Lee, please add to that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And I think it's important that also that if you know someone in the congregation that you know, you think would benefit from a call, a card, an email, some getting in touch, that you let the congregation committee and team know. And you can certainly email me and Ellen or anyone. There are many people on this call that are members of the care committee and the team. And then we have a regular you know, keep in touch with these people. Ellen's right. It's been more of a challenge during the COVID, where it's not in person. It's better now that we can get people in small groups together. I've had, for example, I'm trying to invite people to come to my home so we can have in-person meetings. And I think slowly we can begin to do this. And I think it does help with, well, it helps for everybody. It helps me and Ed. It helps people who live by themselves, that we can all, get together and reach out. And the other thing, William, that I wanted to mention to you is that this is not the first time that I've been part of what you share. And I realize that no matter how old I am, how many relationships I have, I constantly need this kind of a gathering to remind me of, and I have a tendency to interrupt, and I have a tendency to talk, and I need all these reminders that I have to pull myself back and refocus myself. And it's especially hard when you're tired or something is going on that you yourself are dealing with, to be able to listen and to be there, just to physically be there, even if you're sitting in silence with somebody else. So I am eternally grateful for you, and as a member of our congregation, for being able to come and share this this time with us.
Right. So thank you. So I said, I've been doing this for 25 years on a professional level, and I'm still learning. Every time I think, oh, okay, I've got this, something happens, either in my life or in a situation, I go, oh, okay, well, I need to be working on that piece. So that continues. There's a couple of comments in here that I think can help us shift into the other piece I want to mention, unless there were pressing questions about listening.
No.
Okay.
Nancy has a pressing question, but it's not about listening.
No, I'm not sure. Yeah, I do, and I'm not sure if it belongs here or somewhere else. Just say no, not this isn't the right time to answer if that's the case. There's two things that I find particularly challenging in trying to provide support. Number one, if the person is sort of in denial or lacks sort of a certain ability for self-awareness, can be a real challenge, because you might see something completely different. And the other thing is, I've run into friends or people who are really, I think, could benefit from counseling, and yet it's just maybe the way they were raised, or maybe it's mixed with the denial, but they just have an aversion to counseling.
Yeah. I think
This doesn't really have to do with listening.
No, absolutely. But I think it's in here, and I think it also feeds into the next piece, which is around some boundaries. So I think people can be in denial. It's okay. It may not be a good fit for them. It may not help them, but our ethicists in the hospital often will say, people can make bad choices for themselves. They're allowed to do that.
Okay.
So we might want something better for them. We might see something better for them. But if they're in denial and it's working for them, then maybe that's where they are for the moment. But it might be in your next visit or your next conversation, there might be a little door that opens that you go, you know what, just where you see that they've opened the door a little bit to talk about it, or maybe to move the conversation on a little bit. And that might be the moment when if you're listening well, you might hear it and go, oh, yeah. So you mentioned that maybe things aren't going quite as well as you were hoping for. Do you want to say a little bit more about that? So that opens the door for them, maybe a little bit. But if they're in denial, as long as they're not actively in danger of themselves, they can be there. You know, we all live in denial to some degree around many things.
Yeah.
But when it's painful enough, then they'll be ready to make a shift. So that's one piece.
You wanted to mention something. Did you wanted to mention something else? You said.
Yeah, I was going to kind of transition a little bit, if I may, because I want to, and it kind of fits in a little bit with some pieces here.
Absolutely.
There is some overlap, because Ellen talked about, you know, when she does some counseling with people, it's short term. When I do that in the hospital, it's short term. We all have limits to what we can do. So I want to talk a little bit about boundaries. So I'm going to just very quickly talk about boundaries of the role of caregiver, because we have limits. We're not there to fix it. We're not there to make it better. We're not there to cheer people up. We're not there to diagnose people. You know, we're not physicians, we're not psychiatrists, we're not counselors. And even if we are, unless that person has made an appointment with us in that capacity, that's not our role. So even if you're a physician and someone's talking about their health issues, but you're there as a caregiver, that's your role, caregiver. If they need a physician, they will find a physician, or you'll refer them to a physician. My other favorite columnist in the paper, advice columnist, Carolyn Hacks, and one of her things which has entered into our household vocabulary or discussion is it a problem? Is it a problem that needs to be fixed? Is it a problem that I need to fix? And unless you meet all three criteria, you just stay in a conversation. You don't need to fix things. So that's kind of the boundaries around the caregiving piece. There's a very brief summary. Is it a problem? Is it a problem that needs to be fixed? And is it a problem I need to fix? Now, maybe it's a problem I can fix, Ellen. Maybe it's a problem I can fix, because we can fix lots of things. But,
that's why I get hung up, William, right there.
So, but is it a problem that I need to fix, right? Or is it something that someone else needs to fix? But I want to talk a little bit about, because the harder piece to some degree, yes, exactly, is it mine? The other piece around this is, I want to talk a little bit about boundaries, setting boundaries with people that we're caring for. Because we all have limits, we all have many things in our own lives. We already have responsibilities and caregiving and distractions and other stuff. And one of the things, if you continually give and give and give beyond what's sustainable, then we burn out, or we have compassion fatigue, and then we don't show up, or we show up but we're really not present. I think this past couple of years, lots of caregivers have been in the place where they've given and given and given, and it's really hard. I see it in the hospital. People are really tired. People are a little burned out. And when we're burned out and we're really tired, we tend not to be quite as good listeners or quite as compassionate as we would like to be. So one of the ways we can work with that is we also can set some boundaries around what we're able or willing to give to someone who is in need of support, but we don't need to do everything for them. We can offer what we can offer in a way that is sustainable for us over a length of time. Okay. So again, this is about normal routine challenges, maybe chronic situations. I'm not talking about traumatic events or life-threatening ones, those are the ones where we show up. But the ones that are longer term, the longer term relationships, occasionally we will have people who ask for more than we can give, right? They either ask for us to be in a different role than we feel comfortable in, or they ask for more time, or they ask for more engagement, or they ask for more something than we are able to give. And one of the things that can happen is we sometimes can back away because we don't want to say no. So we just kind of fade back, and it still leaves the other person kind of unclear of what's happening. They don't quite understand why we backed away. So setting boundaries is actually a really key skill or ability. The challenge is we all like to be nice people. We are nice. Our faith calls us to be nice. People say, oh, you're a Christian, therefore you need to do everything. You have to be the servant to everyone. And it's case that doesn't work. At least it doesn't work for me, because we all have limits. We all have limits. So we have to set boundaries in ways that still allow us to be engaged and supportive, but knowing our own limits. So part of it is, how do we see the other person? How do we see the person we are caring for? If we see them as broken, then that implies that they can't help themselves and they're entirely dependent on us. That's not how I see people. And theologically, that's not how I see people. I don't think people are broken. I think people, every single one, no matter what's happening in their life, they are the children of God. They are not broken. They might be going through difficult times, challenging times, but that is different than being broken. Okay. So I see them as whole, but going through a difficult time. So that's the theology piece. That's probably as much theology as I'm going to do today. We also have to be clear in our own mind of how much time and energy do I have to give, right? So if, I'm going to use Ellen as an example. If one person comes to Ellen and says, I have this stuff I need to talk about, can you support me over the next 3 months? Ellen's probably going, well, it's one person, sure. If 100 people came to Ellen all in the same week and said, oh my God, after all this going on, I need you to support me for 3 months. Ellen would probably, I'm assuming, be overwhelmed by that, right? So those are two extremes, 100. The challenge comes in, what if it's 3 or 4? Or what if it's 8 or 12? They're much closer, therefore, well, sure, I can do that. But at some point, all of us reach that limit of where we're able to do, and most of us over-assume what we can do. Because we think, oh, I can do this for a week or two, that's fine. But if that week or two goes into a month or two, that's different, because it just takes even more from us. So we have to be realistic of what we can offer. And we also have to realize that at different points in our life, it might be 2 or 3 people is fine, or it might be 10 is fine. But in a month's time, that 10 might not be fine. It might be just back to 2. So our own capacity shifts, and we need to be aware of that piece as well. Which then kind of brings us to the point where if someone asks us for something that we can't do, if someone says, if someone, and it's, the boundary piece always is tricky when it's one of those in-between things. If someone came to you and said, I want you to diagnose what my illness is, you're probably going to go, I'm not a doctor. right? That's easy. But if someone comes and says to you, oh, I need to get to 10 doctor's appointments this week. You go, well, okay, I can drive. And you can do it for a week. You could, maybe. But this problem maybe not sustainable if that's every week, right? So we need to think about what's reasonable. If someone asks us for more than we feel able or willing to offer, how do we find nice ways to say no? And none of us like saying no. Although, Ask Amy is going to tell you, no is a full sentence. So you don't need to say no because, you just need to say no. And it's awkward and it's difficult. But the more you say it, the easier it gets. And ultimately for me, when I say no, it's partly because I know if I say yes, I'm not going to be able to follow through. So I'm going to let the other person down, or I'm going to maybe resent it, or I know that I'm just not going to be as engaged as I would like to be. So saying no actually means that this relationship might actually be able to be maintained longer than it would be if I said yes to everything. So sometimes someone says, oh, can you do this for me? And sometimes we'll say yes. Sometimes we're going to clearly say no. Sometimes the way that we work is we kind of, we say no, but we kind of put a counter offer back out there and say, well, no, I can't get you to 10 appointments this week, but I can take you on Monday to those 2. Does that meet their need? Not entirely, but is that more sustainable for you if you know that this is someone who has long-term medical needs? Much more sustainable. So it's a kind of counter offer. It's not a bargaining place, but it is a counter offer. It's because here's what I can do. If someone says, I want you to come visit me for 2 hours every day because I'm lonely, that's a need. That's a genuine need. But most of us couldn't do that. So it's say, I can't do that, but how about I come over once a week for 2 hours and we could have lunch together, right? So you're recognizing the need, you're making an offer that for you would be sustainable. Now, you're going to get pushback, particularly if it's someone you've already been doing a lot for. You will get pushback. But in terms of setting boundaries, one of the things that's really important is consistency. As you say, well, I know you would like more than that. This is what I'm able to do. Would you like that? I'm happy to come over for a couple hours. Would that be okay? So the piece around that also is when you say you're going to come for 2 hours, show up for your 2 hours and be engaged, be fully present, so that they know you're not just, and actually you're actually going to probably be more present than you would be if you were trying to get there too often and resenting it and thinking, how do I get out of here? But if you show up, you can be fully present and fully engaged. And going back to Jane's suggestion earlier, if someone says, oh, well, how do I get to all these other appointments? Or who else is, how am I going to get people to visit me? Jane's question was great. Jane's question was, that's a great question. Who do you think might be able to help you? Right? The responsibility for this really does belong to the person who's looking for that. Right? Particularly if it's a long-term piece. If you solve all of their problems, that doesn't always work. I think the more we engage with them, say, who else do you think would be able to help you with that? You're helping them be creative. You're helping them think beyond the box that they're seeing, right? And you may or may not get to a full answer. They may or may not get the 2 visits every single day, but I bet they can think of someone who could offer something else. I'm going to stop there. Boundaries is hard, but I think boundaries are really, really important. And if you're a reader of Caroline Hack's, you will, if you look at this, the theme that runs through many of these things, boundaries. And I'm going to stop. Any questions, thoughts?
Well, I say thank you. I'm not able to write that because of my limit, but I'm glad to be able to say it. And it, what I like the most, even more than the substance, is your manner. You're learning with us. And I really, that I appreciate. I always appreciate that in a teacher.
It's always a work in progress.
Yeah.
If I could echo what Lee said, this is one of those areas where I feel like there's always room to learn more, you know, as many interactions as I may have that teach me things. And your counsel is really appreciated. I'd also like to go back to, I think it was Nancy that asked early on about situations where we hear about people who may be in a great deal of need or in a very difficult situation that we feel terrible about, or that might not be in our immediate circle to assist with or support because of the relationship we have or how close we are to that person. But nevertheless, we feel that nurture love of God and love of neighbor in the world, and we want to help. And just in my own experience, just during COVID, I've known people who were in crisis who I was actually able to support more by supporting their supporters. And William, you or Ellen, I'm sure, know the right terms for that circle of grief or circle, those concentric circles of support. And sometimes that's the way we can be the most supportive, is to help the front line when we're not the front line.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. We see that in the hospital. There's some patients who just won't talk to a chaplain, and they can be challenging patients. So the way we support the patients is we support the nurses who are going in to work with the challenging patient situation. So absolutely. And I would, if I was gonna, no one asked for my opinion, but I would offer a suggestion. In the congregational care support group, I would encourage you as a team to support each other in setting boundaries, or even have a conversation about how you might want to set boundaries so that you can do the care that you need to do on the longer term basis. So I'm throwing that out there. No, I didn't ask permission, but I'm just throwing it out there.
No, William, that's very helpful. And we have, I mean, that's one of the reasons that, you know, we wanted you, because we wanted you to come today, is because we have been having those conversations. And I would say that, you know, one of the areas, the sticky areas for the group has been, you know, when, you know, say we're talking about senior adults, you know, it could be other, you know, individuals as well. But oftentimes there is certainly a place for the congregation and the pastor in providing care and support for that person, you know, but we're not social services. We're not experts on estate planning, et cetera, and so forth. However, we are often on the front line. And so there is often a gap between, going back to Callie's point, what we know that individual needs to do to put things in place for themselves, or there's going to be trouble. And yet we're neither the people who can put those pieces in place for them, nor can we force them to put those pieces in place.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that I will go back to the comment our ethicist makes, people have the right to make bad choices. The challenge is that has consequences on those who are trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
So absolutely. So it's a difficult situation because you can't make someone do something, even when you know it's the right thing. And even within our families, we can't make that happen, let alone someone, in a different context. I think what we can do is simply, if they've talked about, I probably should do this, I should put that in place, is how do you have like a list of resources to say, when you're ready, there's a couple of numbers you could call. There might be some of the senior service folks have a little handy chart of, if you need a lawyer, here's 5 you could choose from. So there might be resources you can give that also has you show support on a very practical level, but also sets a boundary of, this is your responsibility. I'm happy to help you make phone calls, but you need to start the process.
I just wanted to actually chime in with what Ellen said, because being with member care over many, many years, I find one of the real gifts of COVID and is the formation of our congregation care team, where our outreach is much broader and it's much farther. And the team has been talking about setting boundaries and sharing experiences. And I think one of the most useful pieces of information among many that you have given today is the word no and a counter offer. For me personally, that just clicked in. I mean, after a while, I use the words tough love, but that's hard to do that. And for me personally, to say no just is not part of my makeup. And I constantly need to be reminded that if I don't say no, I'm going to just slide into a hole. And how to counter offer something in the conversation. No, I can't do this, but specifically, I would be happy to contribute this or set this time. And anyway, just thank you, William. And I know Jane said she couldn't write things down, but Jane, just remember no and counter offer.
Okay. Okay. But I have examples of how 2 people who have helped me, and they've done it without having to get to that point. And that was Melissa and Callie. I have had one of the huge blocks has been my inability to use modern communication. And I needed that to get through COVID. Well, Melissa came out and showed me how to get started on Zoom. But her whole attitude was friend helping friend. And I knew, okay, she didn't need to say anything. I thought, Melissa has gotten me started. And now that I'm started, if I have any questions, I have to find an expert. But at least she's taught me how to do it so I can ask questions. And the same with Callie. She was helping me with just word processing and the basic computer. And she helped me as a friend twice. And that made me realize I have to advertise for a full-time, for someone who can help me on a regular basis. And so those 2 people are doing the right thing just through their attitude.
And I think that's a great piece, because I think when we're providing care to someone, it is as an equal, as a colleague, as a friend. There isn't any power dynamic of power over that you're trying to make anything happen. You really are working as an equal. So yeah, I think that's the perfect way to show up. Absolutely.
William, at what point would you, going back to my earlier example, I agree that, people have the right to fail. And there are situations in which, and you also acknowledge this, there are situations in which somebody else's choices to fail, as it were, could put a significant load on the church if that person doesn't have, you know, family, et cetera, in their lives, you know, so if there's a senior adult that, you know, doesn't have other family members or what have you, then if that person doesn't take certain steps, I mean, I guess the church could do nothing, but I think we'd all feel, you know, pretty, yeah. So in that case, you know, I'm just wondering, what is our, you know, how do we say, look, you know what? You got to do this because we can't help you later on unless you do this. And yeah.
Ideally, it doesn't come quite as direct as that, but for some people, that might be what it is. It's a case of, here as a church, here's what we can do. Here's what, having worked with you for, you know, this length of time, here's some things that we think would be helpful for you to have in place. Here's the benefit. Here's the risks of not doing it. Here's what, if this doesn't go well, here's what we can do, but we can't do more than that until you help us. We want to help you, but we need you to help us help you. So sometimes one of the things that we keep talking about at work is if we explain to patients why we're doing certain things. Because sometimes we miss the why. Because we try and encourage them to do stuff, but we don't always say, we need you to do this, and here's the reason. And here's the implications of doing it or not doing it. And at that point, the patient, or in this case, you know, someone in the church, can make the decision, but they need to know, as long as they understand that there's consequences to how much the church can do, right? And it's not just will do, but sometimes can do. That might be part of that conversation. But I think there are some people for whom it does take, this is what we think you need. If you don't do this, here's the consequences. Here's the limit to what we can do. And the question would be, if we do this, and you know, how are you going to address those other pieces? Because it's not really ours. It's hard. It really is hard, and people will still make choices that maybe don't go well. And
Yeah, no, that's very, very helpful. And I'm just so congregation care folks, just so you know, I'm actually taking some notes here, so I'll share those with folks. Thank you, William.
Sure. So I know we're maybe close to time. I'm happy, you know, if there's a small group that we want to have, you know, more conversation another time, I'm happy to do that. You know, sometimes it's helpful to have someone who's not part of the system talk about this stuff. So if I can be helpful, let me know. Otherwise, thank you for being here.
William, this is enormously helpful.
Great.
Yeah.
This is wonderful.
Yes. Yes, and we may bring you in as our own Ask Amy sometime next winter or spring to one of our congregation care team meetings, and we'll just like all come with our Ask William questions.
Actually, that would be really nice to have that opportunity, yeah, to
Sure.
share and have an outside, you know, view
Sure.
coming in from you. That would be wonderful.
Absolutely. So if I can be helpful, my boundary, and Ellen knows this piece, is because I think very early on in my time in the church, people said, "Oh, you could be part of this. You could do some of the care stuff." And I do that all day. So
Right.
the boundary is no. I'm happy to do some education. I'm happy to consult, as it were. but I don't do the hands-on. So that's my boundary.
You're the consultant to the carers. We like that. We need that. Thank you, William.
All right. Thank you all.
Okay,
Thank
thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Very
you, William.
grateful. All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, William.
Be well, everyone.
Take care. Enjoy
All
the
right.
afternoon.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Much love to you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.